ake ana te atakura, he tio, he hoka, he hauhu, tihei Maori ora. Kei ngā maunga whakahi, kei ngā wai tukukiri, kei ngā mātā waka o te motu, ka nui te mihi, I greet you all. Tēnā koutou, ngā mana whenua o te motu, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou, ngā mana whenua o tēnei rohe, ngai tara, taranaki whānui, Ngāti Tōranga Tira, te awa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. And tēnā koutou ngā manuhiri no ngā haue whā, tēnā koutou, tēnā korua ngā kaihautu, o tēnei kōrero, Julia and Emmeline, tēnā korua. Kia koutou katoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora. Over to you, Julia.
You honour us, Dr. Harris. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. The space industry. It's no longer confined to big government and space agencies. New space is bringing about opportunity for everyone. Everyone who has different skills, culture, and background to grow a sustainable space industry within New Zealand. The space industry is looking at tackling some of the most challenging problems on the planet and off the planet, problems requiring constant innovation and new gravity-defying ways of working. It's so vital that it also lead the way when it comes to building a workforce, one that's up to the challenge of increasingly diverse human presence in space. For those interested in creating a space ecosystem, industry and community in New Zealand, and I feel like I'm speaking to everyone who is very, very interested, everyone here is very interested in that, because of the new resurgence of interest in space technologies, capabilities and exploration. Research is providing fairly compelling evidence that diversity can unlock innovation, will drive market growth, can increase creativity, and will create better teams of problem solvers. So in response to this research and to ensure the ongoing growth and development of this sector, I would like to kick off and introduce our panelists this evening. But first, I will give you just a very short blurb on who I am. As I said earlier, my name's Julia Rothman. I have a lifelong interest in space. I've always loved it and I've always been intrigued by it. I am a 2-decade veteran of designing and launching space systems for the United States government. I did help successfully launch the research and development satellites that were intended to prove President Reagan's Star Wars constellation, for those who recall hearing about that some time ago. While working as the Missile Defense Agency's first space flight test engineer, I did actually get to demonstrate how a missile could be disabled by a laser beam. I spent a significant amount of time working on new weather model development and an Antarctic satellite receiver site that helped double the advance warning for Category 5 hurricanes. I spent 5 years designing an operational system that helped with tracking and predicting all orbiting objects, to include significant space debris, and are currently used by spacefaring countries daily. And I currently lead the space community of interest in Wellington. And in alphabetical order, I would like to introduce our wonderful panelists who have really stepped up this evening and going to lead us in a lively discussion. Dr. Pauline Harris. Dr. Harris is dedicated to the collation and revitalization of Maori astronomical star lore. Dr. Harris now focuses on Maturanga Maori associated with Maori astronomy and traditional Maori calendars known as Maramataka. Extensively involved in the Maori community and an active member of a number of trust boards, to include the chairperson of the Society of Maori Astronomy Research and Traditions, or SMART. By the way, I do love a pithy acronym, so kudos. Dr. Harris completed her PhD and Masters at Canterbury University, centered around gamma ray bursts, high energy neutrino production, and inflationary cosmology. Dr. Avinash Rao, Dr. Rao completed a doctorate in 2015, specializing in robust model-based attitude control for sounding rockets, and then spent 6 years at Rocket Lab from the start of the Electron Launch Vehicle program right through to the 10th flight. In that time, Rocket Lab grew from approximately 10 personnel to nearly 500 employees. And as of Electron's first flight in 2017 was the 5th longest serving team member and remained so until after his departure, after 7 missions and 35 payloads on orbit. Dr. Rao has now moved on to an exciting new space propulsion venture, Dawn Aerospace. Welcome. Emma Scarlett. Emma spent the first half of 2017 helping being the establishment manager for Xera, coordinating the initial tasks required in the formation of this organization. Emma was then hired on as the EA and has since moved into the role of Director of People. She has spent significant amount of time working for Dr. Greg Bodaker, and specifically for Bodaker Scientific down in Otago. And this was the lead agency regarding the successful funding application that led to the formation of Xera. Some of you may know it under its previous name, the Centre for Space Science Technology. And previous to this, Emma worked for a number of years within the health and educational sectors within New Zealand. Welcome, Emma. Daniel Wrench. Daniel is the president of the Wellington branch of the New Zealand Students Space Association. After helping found the NZSSA in 2018, Daniel now oversees the organisation's mission to empower Kiwi students passionate about space and help them pursue their dreams. A lifelong space nut, after my own heart, Daniel hopes to use his degree from Victoria University in Geology and Statistics to contribute to the international mission of returning humans to the moon in the 2020s. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much. I am, before I leap into our questions for the evening, I just had some rules of engagement for our panelists. Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A area, and please identify if it's for a particular speaker. That will help us. Feel free to do this throughout as people are speaking, and I will be then reading them out to our wonderful speakers when we get to the question and answer series session. So without further ado, thank you everyone. I would like to kick off with our first question. Why do we need diversity in the space industry? Anyone have any thoughts?
Yeah, I can start there. So, kia ora everyone. So I think diversity is important in the space industry, mainly because it kind of helps space live up to its lofty promise of uniting everyone together. Because, you know, space has always got this kind of spirit associated with it of being about exploration, about this very kind of human spirit which unites everyone around the world. And to some extent, I don't think it doesn't always matter exactly who is doing the science or taking the photos of the Earth, and that these photos and images and experiences still unite us all. But given that, the more that we can make the people who do these things, who go on these explorations, look like all of humanity, then I think it really does help bring everyone on this journey together. One particular example regarding diversity, which I think is useful to look at, is if you go back to the days of Apollo. Now, if you look on the astronauts who went to the moon, you can say they all look pretty similar. All white men, and most of them from the military as well. And I think in spite of that, the walking on the moon and traveling to the moon still helped unite people across cultures and across nations. And this is something that Michael Collins says when he and Buzz and Neil went around the world after they came back from the moon. Everywhere they went, people would say, we did this. It wasn't just America that went to the moon. We all went to the moon. So I think that does really speak to this uniting spirit of space travel. But again, the more we can make the people who walk on the moon, who walk on Mars, look like the rest of us, I think it'll just make space ever more inspirational and effective in bringing everyone together. I think you're on mute.
I think I can add.
Gosh, that's embarrassing. Please.
Yeah. From my perspective, the need for diversity also has the potential for different cultures having different ways of approaching problems. We also can have different values and aspirations, so that can help feed into different sorts of, different types of research that might be wanting to be conducted or not conducted. For instance, that latest satellite looking at methane, with sustainability in mind. So different cultures might have different values, or maybe not so economic valued as an importance, maybe more of an environmental lens. And also, that different lens or even like our different way of being in different cultures might be more collaborative. It might be wider reaching into multidisciplinary space. So there's all sorts of different things that different cultures and that diversity can bring, the different ways of working. I think that's really important.
So very true.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, I really agree with what you're saying here, Pauline, and I think I feel a little bit like a fraud, Julia, as you're reading everybody's biographies out. As you can tell, I don't have a career directly in the space industry, but I work with people who do. And so I think what Pauline's saying applies regardless of what industry you're in, right? And that, that diversity just brings a real freshness and a different perspective. But I think in this industry like space, who traditionally, as Daniel said, from the white males, then you're not going to, you need to be able to move that to start attracting more people and attracting that diversity into the industry.
So true. Thank you. Thank you all. I'd like to move on to our next question. How does diversity play a role in your own organisation?
I think I can maybe address that first. Well, I mean, everybody's in such different areas, aren't they? So I think, I don't want to be kind of negative, but I'm kind of the educational sector. I think it does lack representation. So, and diversity, that was the one, right? Yeah, diversity in the organisations, yeah. So there's a real lack of it, and the problem with that, how that lack of representation, it can impact even the journey of people wanting to come through the pipeline, to come through into the industry, and not just the space industry, like the science industry as a whole. So in the education sector, if you don't have people with diversity, you don't have those role models to be able to encourage the younger people to come through, and that's significantly problematic. And we see that in across the sciences, that there's a lack of, I'm coming from a Maori and Pacific perspective, there's a real lack still of Maori and Pacifica coming through into the postgraduate. There's an increasing amount in the undergraduate, but there's significant problems with this pipeline. If you don't have them coming through to postgraduate, it's unlikely that they're going to go into the industry, because you need those kind of minimum kind of qualifications and capability to go into industries such as the space industry. So yeah, there's a definite problem with the system, and I think it is improving, but it's quite slow. And the changes that have been happening in the world too, I think will make, it's unfortunate, but I think they make people think about how we need to change those systematic, whether or not be racism or prejudice against other people. I think it's made us think. So I'm hopeful. Yeah.
I can probably add a perspective there as well. Julia, first of all, thank you for organising this, and in some of the preparation for this, you sent through a few articles that were some really interesting reading, and one of the things that really leapt out to me was the Harvard Business Review piece around diversity, and it talked about both innate diversity being culture, background, ethnicity, so on and so forth, but also acquired diversity being behaviours that we can all acquire in terms of acceptance, giving everyone a voice, shared decision making, and so on and so forth. And a lot of that really resonated with me. It's something that we worked really hard to achieve in our team at Rocket Lab and across the business there, and the same at Geographical Aerospace as well. And I guess to address your points, Paul, well, to contribute to your points, I guess we all have a role in sort of helping and promoting diversity of innate diversity as well. And if we have those cultures within our organisations of not jumping to conclusions, listening to all perspectives, it can help us overcome some of those systematic biases that may be there by looking past, some of the outwardly obvious aspects of an individual and really focusing on who they are as a person and what they have to contribute. So I think starting with acquired diversity first is something we can all achieve through our own effort, and then that can help us push through to addressing some of those difficulties that we see.
Thank you all. So insightful. Thank you. I'd like to sort of piggyback on that and sort of grow into the next question, which is, what are some of the challenges? You've both already sort of touched on that briefly, but do you have any further thoughts on the additional challenges that could be overcome to increase the pipeline of diversity coming in?
I'll just say it briefly and kind of open it up to the others, but in terms of capability and capacity building, even within in the industries and with the other organisations and businesses, it's making opening up with a culturally relevant environment, like I think Avinash was mentioned that before. So like I know for our teaching, different ways of teaching and learning, but also just different ways of being, like we have wānanga, we have hui, and we have food, and just those kind of cultural variations which some people might even miss. Making an open place to bring for other cultural groups to come into. I think I'll just leave it open for some of the others.
I think from my experience of dealing with students and running a student space association, it's just, I think one of the challenges is trying to just raise awareness of space as a field that people can actually be a part of. Particularly for groups who are not traditionally represented in this area, but I think for society as a whole, for students who are finishing high school and looking at what to study and what they want to do as a career, I think just trying to emphasize the fact that this is this field is growing so rapidly in so many different areas that you don't necessarily have to be studying physics or engineering to get into space, and people from lots of different arenas can participate in the industry and learn about this incredible place out in the stars. And I think if we emphasize that for groups who aren't represented, especially to get them more represented, but also raise awareness across the board and getting more people interested in space.
If I can follow on from that, and this speaks to something you mentioned a couple of questions ago, Pauline, around education and who's coming through the degree and postgraduate program. We advertised a software engineering role last year. I think we had around 60 applicants, and from a gender perspective, it was 100% male. And so for an organisation that is trying to be intentional, trying to become more intentional about having a diversity, there's no way we could have appointed a female, obviously, when no one had applied. And so if they're not, I think it's a real challenge that you can only select from the pool that you've got. And to remedy that, we're talking years, because, it's actually the high school students, and I think there's a question that speaks to this a little bit later, so I don't want to go into too much, but, it's sort of a 5-10 year cycle before you can actually see a significant change in that. So, that is a challenge, right? Even if you're an organisation that's going, right now, we want to do something differently, you can't just flick a switch. So it's a long-term commitment.
I've had the same experience in the past hiring through Rocket Lab and really wanting to have more diversity and more balance. And as you say, there were many jobs where we didn't have a single female applicant. But one of the things that we've been looking at quite closely at Argo Navis is trying to understand how can we change our advertising, how can we reach a wider audience, and are there aspects of what we're doing when we advertise a role that may be not encouraging a wide group of applicants. So I believe I haven't read it myself, but I understand there's some research out there that shows quite clearly that, for example, women are less likely to apply for a role if they don't tick all of the sort of bullet point boxes compared with men. And so if we're saying we want the best and you have to have all these skills and don't bother applying if you don't, that can even bias who we actually get into our email inbox. So one of the things, we're a pretty small organization so far, but that's certainly something that we're planning on trying to address. So to say, look, if you don't have all these skills, it's okay. Please apply. We'd like to see what you do have, because we can't summarize what we want in 5 bullet points, kind of thing. So something that we might be able to do to help.
Yeah, I'd like to just follow up on that, if that's all right, Julia, because from my experience, it's the same too, like in terms of our positions in academia and that. And what I found is that sometimes there needs to be a kind of a proactive recruitment type of, so you actually seek the people out, especially if they're going to try and tick off all those boxes. And headhunting, basically. I don't really like that word, but yeah, headhunting. And I've had that happen to me where people have rung me up and I was like, oh, that's great, but then at the same time, there needs to be, depending on who they are, there's a different way of engaging with the people, to whether or not they're female or different cultural groups as well. There's different nuances as opposed to talking to men. Sorry, I don't know if I can say that. But yeah, especially when people lack confidence too, or think that they have to achieve everything in that job description.
If I may jump in, merely because Avinash just mentioned the study regarding how women and men interpret job descriptions. I was just reading the statistic over the weekend, and men will apply to a job they're interested in if they meet 60% of the criteria, and women have to be north of 90%. So that is a very big difference, and I was quite flabbergasted. I was doing a little research.
Also, 1 in 10 women only apply for promotion as well, just as an aside. So it's a similar sort of kind of behaviour.
And negotiating. Thank you. Sorry, I got a little off topic. Apologies to everyone. So as I said, I was doing a little bit of research over the weekend because, well, I'm that kind of person. And I found a number of organizations that had become very concerned about historically underrepresented communities as far back as 2 decades ago. I'm sure there are other organizations whose concerns went even further back than that, but let's face it, I was searching on the internet, and 2 decades ago aligns with when things started showing up. And so very specifically, I found the Advanced Earth and Space Sciences Organization, a rather large, very complex multi-nation organization interested in space science, had identified this as a concern and had made several initiatives to do with around many of the initiatives that you've already mentioned, such as internal education, tailored outreach to some of the underrepresented groups, raising awareness of career opportunities, and academic policy change. This managed to grow their entire organization in terms of diversity internationally quite well, but they still kind of struggled domestically. And I was just curious if you've seen other avenues that could be unpicked here or explored.
So is this about some of the different education initiatives that were done?
Educate, however you choose to interpret that question, I guess. It wasn't intended to trip anyone up. It was just, does anyone have any thoughts on, we're seeing that increased diversity internationally, which is fantastic. But what could we do? I hear headhunting. I hear, or I've heard it called shoulder tapping as well. Hey, can we talk to you? Would like you to apply to this job. You, very specifically. Which is always gratifying to hear, but always a little intimidating at the same time. And so I was wondering if there were any other things, such as, since we have actually a fairly comprehensive educational sector representation, if there are any academic policy changes that can be explored.
I might just roll it back to the beginning.
Do it. Go for it.
In the education sector, we've run a few, like over the last 5 years, we started some really big kind of outreach initiatives to reach Maori and Pacific communities around Aotearoa. And they've reached over 20,000 rangatahi, so youth. And they've been really huge, but it's a mixture of, made them culturally relevant, making the science culturally relevant. We had rockets, on the way we had rockets, we had robots, we had all sorts of things. It's in collaboration with Te Rōpū Awhina here at Vic. But yeah, that's all part of the pipeline, for us anyway, because we're trying to build that pipeline. But it's a pipeline the whole way through. So if you talk about policy in the education space too, there's strategic plans by educational organisations that state that they want diversity, that they think incorporating mātauranga Māori across the whole organisations and the like. But it's always interesting how people actually implement. So you can have all the policies you want, have all the strategic plans you want, but if they're not being implemented, that's problematic. So you won't see change until it's implemented. And that needs maybe the bottom-up growing. So growing capacity and capability bottom-up, but you also got to grow it top-down. And that's been quite successful in some other things that I've seen. So ensuring that you have leaders and educators at the top and then growing them from the bottom. Supported by policy and strategic plans, of course.
Fantastic, thank you.
I think one initiative which could be quite helpful here in New Zealand and around the world for kind of pushing students into STEM and into space more specifically, things like social groups and clubs and kind of places where students can join without any kind of academic prerequisite, where they can still learn about these subjects and get involved and hang out with other like-minded people without the kind of stress of actually having to study it, or not seeing anyone like them studying that subject or being high up in that field. I think just through those more kind of social avenues might be a good way for people to easily and slowly get involved in this area, which people like them haven't traditionally been in a much more kind of friendly and easygoing way. And then maybe they can discover they have a passion for that topic and then actually be brave enough and motivated enough to actually pursue it in their careers or in their academics.
So very important. There's a New Zealand Rocketry Association, which I've only learnt of in the last few years. And I would love to see some sort of collaboration between them and, say, intermediate age students, which is the right age to, get them.
Interesting as well. We've had some, as an organisation, had a fair bit to do with the local high school here in Alexandra, and they've sort of been in for different sessions over the years. And the most recent time I went in, they'd got a bit of a STEM group happening. They've got a STEM class happening now, but they were having to battle to get it approved as an NCA subject. And so there's sort of a little bit of the dabbling fun stuff at a younger age, but it's harder for them to take that through. And so, that's when you're going to lose them, right? If you don't keep them there. And so what we saw at that school is a real factor of success came down to the individual teachers. And so, so there was the math teacher, she was running a STEM group for girls, and then and it's actually her husband happens to be the physics teacher, and so he's got the wider STEM group happening. But it's only through their passion, their personal passion, that's actually happening in the school, rather than it being, like a school-wide approach. So it'd be really interesting to see how that shapes over the coming years. But coming back to what Pauline's saying, that yes, you can have policy, but there's a difference between policy and then actually doing it. And I think at the moment, it's coming down to the people who are involved.
To me, that's really encouraging, though, Emma. I mean, I remember when I was at school, there's certain people that are always going to be interested in science, and they're kind of the nerdy types. But I certainly count myself as one of them. But there's probably a larger group who need it to be made a bit more interesting, just to get them over the line to begin with. And I think, from what what Pauline said, for different people, that's going to be just something different. Clearly for Māori, then relaying that back to Māori culture can possibly be quite a useful way to achieve that. And I know some great work that I understand you're doing, but it can be different for everyone. But if there are these groups forming and there are more practical aspects, and it's not sort of, you're going to have to learn algebra, but that's just a tool for you to be able to create something new, rather than, solve this algebraic equation, which is kind of how it was when I was at school. It's encouraging to hear that things are changing in that area, and hopefully we will see across the spectrum, more overall people getting into this field, and through that further diversity as well. So.
One of talking again, but again at the high school, so 2 years ago, we helped facilitate Act in Space, national sort of a hackathon thing, and we supported a team from the local high school. And again, like you're just saying, that often the kids who are into that sort of stuff might be considered to be a bit nerdy. And so there was this group of children or students, young adults, that put their hands up to do it. And all the other kids were kind of like, oh, it's a bit geeky. And then these guys did amazing in Christchurch at the Nationals and ended up getting second. And they were so amazing that the Space Agency paid for them to go to France. And that was a real, they came back to school and everyone else was like, oh no, look what we missed out on. And so I think, international travel is not going to be the answer to solve all this, right? But if there's some pretty cool stuff or a little bit of things to inspire people along the way, can help.
Tech is quite cool now. Like it used to be, certainly, quite a lot of negative connotations around, the geek and nerd and whatever words you want to pick. Most of them had negative connotations. And I think these days that's surely changed, given how pervasive technology is in the world. When I've worked with people in the US, I think they're a bit ahead of us in that sort of change in attitudes. There are far more women and far more diversity over there. It's got a bad rap at the moment, but my experience was that there is a lot of diversity, and certainly women in engineering and technology, there are far more of them as a proportion, and perhaps overcoming some of the stigma around tech is what's required to promote that as well. Make people more comfortable to say, yeah, I'm an engineer, and it's a cool thing, right? It's not something else.
Thank you so much, Avinash. And if I may just piggyback, because I'm just full of facts this evening, of the 5 largest aerospace defense companies in the States, 4 out of 5 of them are currently headed by women at the moment. So there's been some successful initiatives out there. Right, I'm probably talking too much for a moderator. There's probably some sort of moderators organization out there that's yelling at me. How could diversity or inclusivity, whether in culture, ethnicity, gender, but also variety of expertise, intellectual perspectives, values, interests, etc., contribute to the creation of new space fields?
Well, with regards to diversity of kind of interest and expertise, that's something that we at the New Zealand Student Space Association, even I can't say it, have really tried to push, and that when we advertise at clubs, we can try and get get new students to join the club. So we always make a point of saying, you know, it doesn't matter what you're studying. It doesn't have to be physics, doesn't have to be software engineering. It can be, you know, law, art, drama, whatever it is, we want to have you on board. You just need to be passionate about space. And I think, you know, at one level, that's just about including as many people as possible. But then when you think about all these different people from different backgrounds with different passions, I think it is going to lead to creation of more fields and for better decision making in the space industry and for what we're going to do in space. And I think particularly as space does become a bigger part of our lives, you know, it's already a really important thing, but, you know, as humans start, you know, exploring further into space again and, you know, walking on the moon again this decade, hopefully, you know, more and more questions are going to come up about the more humanities side of this mission, and, you know, ethical questions, legal questions, artistic questions, and I think the more we can include people from different areas of expertise as well as different cultures, I think it's just really going to benefit all these questions and things that we don't know yet. So I think that's something we've really tried to push at our organisation.
Fantastic, thank you.
Oh, add something to that. Yeah, is it all right? That's all right. I mean, I spoke before about values and kind of morals and stuff, but one thing I didn't mention is that in terms of even like the space industry with long distance space travel, I know that like the waka voyagers and the navigators have been, some of the organisations have reached out to other Indigenous groups, and particularly them, because they do long distance voyaging, and, you know, the whole having to traverse long distances for long periods of time and how you actually do that. I didn't think about this when I was thinking about the questions before, but it just popped in my head and I thought that's actually really important. I mean, we can add our intelligence and our knowledge and all of that sort of thing, but this particular thing was pretty cool, and I know that they've had conversations with some of the other space industry about this long voyaging. And how do they do it? They stop off on islands, don't they? So maybe is that a possibility? You know, let's create many islands along the way if they need to go long distances, and the psychology around that sort of thing too, and who you choose. So it's just some random throwing, but it's super cool. But we're all geeks here, so that's all good.
It's so relevant.
I
what
know,
a fabulous analogy. A great example. I love that. I've written it down. I'm like, oh, how do we make more of, how do we investigate that a little more?
Well, I've interviewed some of the navigators about it. What's the potential around it? And it is cool. There's lots of potential.
Yeah, no, that is really interesting. Like, there's a huge interest in about how crews will be able to handle the psychology of traveling for months at a time. And if we can learn more about, yeah, like Polynesian navigators and people who have gone on such voyages, I think that would be really, really useful. Yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you. I'd like to move on to our next question. The lack of opportunities can come in two forms. One can be external, the expectations that people will have of you based on what you look like, and specifically your appearance. And the second, the mindset, which is internal, where people give up because they think it's silly to have the space dream. Any thoughts on how we can overcome this in our young students?
I can probably comment on that. So, I mean, I started out in the space, or what was to become the space industry, back in 2009 as a student. And, you know, it's fair to say that back then there were a fair share of naysayers. My parents would have been one of them, and weren't quite sure whether I should be studying rockets, and, you know, plenty of others. But one thing that was really apparent was that, you know, and Peter Beck at Rocket Lab was just starting back then too. You know, I think he had 2 employees back then, and he had the same opinions coming to him regularly. And you know, the thing was that we had a couple of champions. For me, it was Dr. Chris Harnett at UC, and the electrical engineering department, and FRST back then, which is Callaghan now, sort of all we needed was, you know, a couple of people to back us. Same with Pete, Mark Rocket, you know, backed him. And so you can, you know, what it led to is this really clear and tangible examples of what's possible. And now the attitudes have entirely changed. So I think the key there is provide examples, tangible examples that are relevant to our young people, that of what is possible. And then kind of going back to what I mentioned before around the stigma, try and change the attitude towards those things. But ultimately, you know, if you know it's possible, people are encouraged to stick to their guns and do what they really want to do. You know, they can overcome that. And so the more examples we have of that, the better, I think. And it is happening. So it's great.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, I could add to that as well. I think what you said, Julia, about the idea of the space dream dying is a really important one, and that I think, well, not important that we should support it, but something we need to overcome, because I think as, you know, kids go from primary school when they might be obsessed with the planets and the stars and rockets and things, perhaps as they go through high school and then start considering options for university, and they're supposed to, you know, take their studies a bit more seriously, that they will get, you know, kind of frowned at for wanting to actually pursue something like space as a career or at university. So again, linking back to what I was saying before about just really putting it out there that space is a viable career option these days, and it's just going to become more so into the future. So if we can really make that space dream live on throughout, you know, students' academic career, I think that's just going to be so beneficial in growing the industry and allowing them to pursue that passion and not just leave it as some kind of unrealistic dream that they liked as a kid.
Just to add to that the teachers play such a critical role in ensuring that kids believe that they can do something, and that they believe in themselves. And not to bring a downer on it, but like Maori have had huge experiences in school where, you know, I got told I was stupid at school and wasn't going to become anything, but I had the attitude that was like, I'll show you. But a lot of our people don't have that, and it's you ask most Maori, they've probably had those. I mean, don't actually do that, but you know, they had a lot of those experiences, and it's still, no offence to the south, it can still happen more down there. I mean, I've lived down there, and you can see it. So yeah, I think there really needs to be a change or a directive, if that's the right word, from above to ensure that in our education system, that they're not allowed to do that, that they need to uplift people, yeah, instead of pushing them down. And when we go into our education programs, we always try and uplift them to ensure they believe in themselves. That's a long journey. It's a long journey for some people. So yeah, definitely some things need to still change in the education system. And I think it's starting to change, but might be different depending on what latitude you are. Yeah.
Interesting. Actually, you've brought up geography, if I may. I might like to pivot to a slightly different question, if that's all right. Geographical diversity within New Zealand. So we're all aware, we're currently in the Wellington session of this particular community TechWeek session. There's often a focus in on Auckland for obvious reasons. It's our largest city, 1 in 3 people live there. Does anyone have any thoughts on the importance of geographical diversity within New Zealand, especially as it pertains to the space industry?
I can probably jump in on that one, just to give, for those who don't know, and I'll see a couple of our team are actually on this call, so hey guys. As an organisation, so we were originally set up in Alexandra. The intent from government around that, well, not specifically in Alex, but to get it to be in the regions. As Julia's just said, there is often a focus on Auckland or Wellington or even Christchurch, and so we wanted to set up this organisation in the regions, and so Alexandra was chosen. We started recruiting to Alex, had some success, but then for one reason or another, all really genuine reasons, some of the people that we had brought to Alex couldn't stay in Alex. And so it started not working. And so we had to make a real conscious decision at one point. It's like, are we actually going to stick with that as our dream? Or are we going to do what we need to do to keep the best people on board? And so we went for the latter. We've become now a distributed team. So we've got 17 permanent staff on board. We're spread out from Alexandra right through up to Auckland, around a few in the cities and a few in the regions. And I think it was a really, really good move for us. I think it's kind of like, you're saying, we're talking earlier about the different perspectives that different cultures bring. I think the breadth of people that we've got in our team of extremely clever and with varied backgrounds is amazing for our organisation. And if we'd stuck to that, it's got to be in this place, then we would have really lost that. So I think the thing that I find hard, no, it's not even hard with this, but I love Alexandra, but it's coming to accept that not everybody actually wants to live here. And so allowing people to have that diversity of lifestyle, of, some people do love being in the big city. Some do love, we've got one guy out in Raglan, he wants to be out near the beach, which Alexandra is one of the furthest places from the ocean. So that's not going to work for him, So it's, although, it is quite a tangent, like you said, Julia, from some of the other areas of diversity we've been talking about. But because we've gone with this, we've been able to bring together the best people we can, rather than good people who are willing to live in one specific place.
Thank you, Emma.
I think I might just say something quickly. I'm from Mahia, right? So it's been really interesting seeing, Rocket Lab and that being set up at home. And I don't really know what I want to say about it. I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that it was just such a different thing to place in because Mahia is our home and our iwi, but Mahia is also known for its tourist, like a holiday kind of spot. Yeah, but then, then putting the rocket there. I know that they had their choices, but it was quite an interesting process, and I know it hasn't been, what should I say? The whānau felt quite differently. There was mixed opinions on why it should be there, and I think that's kind of, I guess I just wanted to mention that because it's, the geography of it, there's reasonings, but kind of that interaction with the whānau on the ground in those places, it was interesting to watch. Quite a lot of the whānau are quite happy with it now, and then probably some that aren't. But just mentioning that. And also, Alex is cool. I just have to say, Emma, I tried to get a job at Lauder.
I agree, Pauline. It's amazing.
Neva's not far. Neva's down at Lauder.
Exactly, yeah, it is. Julia, if I might, I see someone's actually just asked a question as a follow-up to that. So do you want me to respond?
Actually, I was wondering if we could hang out till the Q&A session, and then I could just read them aloud for everyone. Just a shout out to everyone. If you can pop them in the Q&A, it's a little easier for me to track. As they pop up on chat, they can get buried a little bit. We've got a lively chat situation. I realize you guys can't speak and read simultaneously, but I'm watching it happen on the chat, and there's a lively set of discussions happening. So thank you to everyone who's our speakers and those our participants who really have a lot of questions to ask. Fantastic. For the record, both Alex and Mahia are beautiful. And I'd love to hear some more at some point, Pauline, about the local iwi and Rocket Lab and the launch vehicles. I'd love just at some point. On to the next question, if I may. Culture versus policy. What is best, and what have you found to be best for promoting increased diversity?
Sorry, talking again. It's
Go for it.
Culture and policy, I think it's an interesting concept, right? And so as Julia said in the intro, I've been part of Xera, formerly CSST, right from when it started. And so we started off with a very small team, and we've grown as we've gone through, obviously. Right from the start, we've been quite intentional about how we shaped our culture. And the thing with culture, and that it's about how you do things, but so much of it is formed by the people that you have on your team. And I think particularly, for others who are in smaller organisations, if you've got a small group and then one person comes in, it can shift significantly the way things are done. And that's the beauty of bringing in new people, right? And that diversity of perspective, diversity of opinion. And that's all good as long as it's in the direction that you actually want to go. And so that's where I think policy needs to come in, or, whether it's policy or, just a written up way of doing things. It doesn't have to be a formal policy document to help, I guess, codify the way you want to do stuff, so that you've got sort of that minimum standard. Sounds like you've been quite negative about it, but basically you've got a bottom line going, well, this is what is important to us. Other people will come in and shape that, but this is where we're at. And so I think both are needed. I think the thing with policy, though, is that it can just be some words. It can just be some words on paper, and the value in policy is the acting on it. And so that's when the people come in and the culture of the organisation. So it's a bit of a chicken and an egg. I would argue both have their place.
Fantastic, thank you. If I could move on to the next question, because I still want to leave time for our Q&A session. I see we've got a few coming on in. How has diversity changed from when you started within your field? Has it grown? Has it increased? Has it decreased? For whatever definition you wish.
Probably take that one first up. I'm probably most qualified to talk about New Zealand, rather than the wider industry, but I think there's been huge change over the 10 or 12 years since I got started. I mentioned the attitudes towards this industry, that that's sort of the diversity of thinking, I guess, in New Zealand around the space industry has changed a lot. The diversity of projects has changed an awful lot. It was just Rocket Lab and us at UC 10, 12 years ago, and now there's just this, for example, is an example of it. You've got rocket outreach programs all around the country. You've got new Christchurch Aerospace Centre, new startups coming out of Auckland Uni. So, all around the country, there's a diversity of projects and a diversity of directions. I think gender and ethnic diversity has improved. It still has a long way to go, that's for sure. But I think those pipelines that we've been talking about are going to really help address that. We want to be bringing all sorts of people through from across the spectrum. I would say that when I started, it seemed like Rocket Lab had 3 guys. One of them was an Indian guy, and we had 2 guys, and one of them was an Indian guy. So it seemed to be Indians and white guys at the start, and it's sort of ballooned out from there, which is great. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't know how it's changed in the US, but certainly we can look at the US. Certainly the space industry is not perfect, but we can see that those gains can happen. They have happened over there, and I'm sure they will here. So I think it's going to continue to change and continue to become more diverse in all sorts of ways, and it's really encouraging.
And I think the fact that, like you said, I'll just quickly, the fact that these conversations are even happening is a really positive sign as well, right? So I think, I haven't been in the industry for long enough to see what the change has been, but the fact that as part of TechWeek, there is this focus around promoting diversity within the space industry is fantastic, and is a sign of the conversations that are starting to happen, and after conversations will come action, and we will see real positive change. Sorry, Daniel.
That's okay. I think from my perspective, taking a more global view, when you think about space, and the pinnacle is always going to be, people exploring space and astronauts. And I think as someone who's grown up wanting to learn more about space and has been following NASA and, you know, the International Space Station and things like that. I think as a young person today, it's really encouraging seeing how much more diverse NASA's astronaut corps is, for example, compared to someone growing up in the days of Apollo. And, you know, just the fact that, you know, it's such a much wider range of people, you know, very almost balanced genders in the astronaut corps these days, I think. And there's with the new SpaceX commercial crew program, there's another launch coming up a few months down the track, and included in its crew of 4, there's a Japanese person, African American, and a female, all in that one crew. So I think for people who are perhaps less more interested in the kind of the romantic view of space and astronauts and that kind of thing, I think in that area as well, we're also seeing really encouraging improvements when it comes to diversity.
Julie, I might just add something too, which I kind of forgot, just like the waka kōrero. But I mean, you know, we predefine like an industry, so space industry. But I suppose for Maori, for us, we would probably, this motorbike's going past, sorry, but we would probably include knowledge about space as well, so our astronomical knowledge in that. And I suppose I would just probably mention just how much that's grown in the last 20 years. You know, now we have matariki being, so just kind of bringing it home from the international, we bring it home. Matariki now, people wanting that to be a public holiday, to Professor Rangi Mātāmua getting the Prime Minister's Science Award. Huge acknowledgements. After 20 years, the amount of people who are interested in our knowledge around space is huge. It's just really grown. So I almost forgot to say that, but I think that's applicable here to how it's grown. And because, you know, we define things differently, you know, space industry, space knowledge, but how do different cultures kind of define that? Which maybe for the next panel, yeah, to put that as a question. But yeah, that's it.
I have always actually had it as a bit of a goal, and it's going to have to happen next year, regretfully. I would love to have a session for our space community of interest on Matariki, where we could discuss not just the history and the knowledge, but, you know, how all the areas of interest, you know, and really sort of unpick the history, unpick the science of it. I think it would be a really fascinating area. And I think people are really interested.
And you have like experts who have expertise on astronomical history of astronomy in New Zealand from overseas, you know, the history of astronomy everywhere, you know, and space.
Oh, it'd be fascinating. I will follow up. And so if I may, I'm going to move on to the next question. Getting a job. We discussed very briefly career opportunities. Getting a job in the space sector, this applies to almost every industry, doesn't really just mean sending out your CV. It's going to have to mean reaching out to others, utilizing connections. Does anyone have any thoughts and ideas on or pieces of advice for those that happen to lack connections?
I'll jump in first there. Again, that's something that we at the NZSSA have really tried to help students out with, is bringing them together and then acting as an organisation to reach out to people involved in the space industry and really get them to connect to students, so students can see this pathway from their studies into the space industry and try and help build those connections. I don't know, Space do a similar kind of initiative, and they try and collect everyone who's related to space and compile them in a single place, so people can much more easily find out who's out there, start getting in touch with people, being proactive, and actively trying to engage with the space industry out there, which a lot of people don't even realize is there. So I think the more we can use organizations like us and Space to help people build those connections is one way to go about getting people a start.
Fantastic, thank you.
I'd just back that up, Daniel. We've just hired a couple of people at Argo Navis, and one of them was a graduate who approached me at the one of the Christchurch Aerospace meetups. Was out there being proactive and come and had a chat, and then very persistently emailed me every month for about 4 months. And you know, but you know, we got him on board to do some consulting work with us, and then now we've hired him full time. So, you know, I think getting out there, being proactive. Most people in this industry are not particularly arrogant. They're keen to chat and keen to have a yarn, and friendly bunch. So get out there and get amongst it. There's lots of opportunities now. There weren't, you know, in the past. So.
Just if I can jump back to an earlier conversation we had when you're talking about the shoulder tapping or headhunting, and I think this is where this becomes so important, because we've been talking about it. We're looking for the next role we're looking to recruit for. Some of our people know some amazing people, but again, you're only then connecting with your existing network, and so that's a really cool way to get some amazing people, but it makes it hard to widen that pool, because and so I think it's almost like an anti-diversity approach sometimes, and so I think like the guys were just saying, got to get yourself out there, got to spread your network so that you become part of more people's so you're in reach of being shoulder tapped.
Might I say, I applaud the persistence of the student who approached you 4 months in a row, Avinash.
I kind of thought if he was willing to go to that extent, then it would be only fair to give him a shot. So.
Sorry, Pauline, I didn't mean to cut you off. All right, let's take.
Oh yeah, I actually will say something. I was going to say, so they can do the actively approach, but also the organisations can maybe attend different things where different diverse groups may be. You know, like in the education programs and stuff, they might want to come along and run a table or different expos and try and reach out to people as well.
So very important. Thank you everyone. That actually brings us to the end of our my questions. I thought I might jump over to the Q&A session. Ooh, and we are getting some. Very impressive. It looks like these have been prompted by some of our questions we've been asking. I'm just going to go ahead and read them, and everyone feel free to jump in. What does flexible working look like in the panelists' workplaces? Living in cities and hours of work can be barriers to an industry or job. And actually, there's a related question that has to do with location diversity. So I guess they could be separate questions. They could almost be the same question, depending on how you choose to interpret that.
Do you want me to jump back in there again on that one?
Could you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely is part of, within our organisation, as part of our distributed workforce model, we also have a flexible working arrangement, and I think it just makes sense. So we've got some guys who do their best work at 1 a.m. and then they don't want to be at a meeting any earlier than at 9 the next morning, you know. And so if we box those guys and said, these are the hours that you have to work at, we're going to get a suboptimal result. So I think yes, there are some meetings, you know, like there'll be a few meetings during the week that they need to be part of. And so they need to make sure they're up out of bed by then. But beyond that, if they're getting their work done and they're able to be with the team when they need to be with the team, then it just seems logical to let them work what does best for them. As far as do people work remotely so we can have location diversity? It's an interesting question. So I guess when we made the decision to go to a distributed workforce, one of the elements we did think about was about, we're all around New Zealand now, we're now closer to customers. You know, we've got people in Wellington who are able to go meet with people at New Zealand Space Station. redundancy, or, you know, like different, and so it's far easier because you're not having to fly people around the country because we've already got someone there. So we did think about that. The thing we didn't really think about, but that has been an amazing benefit, is around the resilience that it can offer an organisation. Because I think if you, you know, there was a national disaster, it's not likely that the whole country, you'd think that the whole country was going to be affected at once. But then along comes COVID and the whole country is affected. But again, we've got people already in their own places and able, so like from a operational point of view, it was like a minimal disruption to our organisation. Yes, we had to shift with how we met with the external people, but internally we already had that sort of built into it. So it was, yeah, it's been a really positive thing for us.
Yeah. Think of the Zoom skills you already had.
Not that you'd know, but when I could join the call earlier, but yes.
Doing great. Does anyone else have any thoughts on working from home? Oh, no. No worries.
I love working at home, but not too much. We have quite a lot of flexibility actually, but then there's still expectations that you need to be present. That's all really, but it can be really healthy, and you can connect more to you. It's just healthier not to be at work too much, right? Hopefully no one from work's listening. Gives flexibility with your family. Yeah.
It allows you to be your best self, I think, if you can, you know, like, yeah, work alongside the other parts, because we're not just a work person. We've got a whole different parts of our being.
Yeah.
And
commuting.
Yeah.
Carbon footprint.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. If I may, the next question, where are the panelists seeing opportunities for creatives and those with a passion for humanities within the space industry? Any thoughts on roles and challenges that could benefit from these skill sets or mindsets? Oh, I could kick this one off with some more statistics because I'm that kind of person, if that's okay. So recently, we had a speaker who said that within the space industry, that 60% of all personnel are a STEM-based major, and the remaining 40% actually made up a variety, came from non-STEM backgrounds. So lawyer, artist, a wide variety. If I may share a personal anecdote that I hope is appropriate. Someone I know who has one of the most interesting space positions I've ever seen grew up wanting to be a model. She could not be a model. It was never going to happen. But she got some training and she became a presenter of all military space launches on camera. She loves her job. Not a STEM background, but it's a fascinating story. But she loves space. She finds space interesting. There are non-STEM roles out there. Apologies if anyone else had anything to say.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and it makes sense that, you know, some people are fascinated by the physics and engineering, you know, whether it's astronomy and the expansion rate of the universe, or, you know, valves and nozzles on a rocket engine, you know, and that's where traditionally people have gone their careers in. But for me personally, I'm really more interested in the kind of philosophy of space, in both, on the one hand, what it means for humans to explore and to travel to other places, and what does it mean for humanity to walk in a different world? How does that change our culture? How does it affect us, you know, spiritually, culturally? And in the realm of astronomy, you've got, you know, what does it mean for us to be these tiny humans on this speck of dust in the vast and endless universe? I think there's big philosophical questions which people from the humanities are much more well equipped to help us answer, or at least ponder in an articulate way, as opposed to the people we traditionally associate as being in space, as being, you know, the physicists and the engineers. If we get more of those people from arts and humanities, they can really help us understand the meaning behind this endeavor. So I think, yeah, I just love thinking about that all the time, just what it means to explore and to be in the universe, you know, not those purely technical or scientific questions.
And in one of our courses we teach, I'm at Science and Society here, but in one of them we've got a Mars module, and one of the assignment questions is, what sort of people would you send to Mars? And that's the assignment. So you're going to write and justify what sort of people would you send to them. Not necessarily on the first one, or maybe the follow-up ones, but yeah, the diversity of it. So that was really interesting. But I just wanted to mention, like, I've got a student, she's creative, and she's now working with us on our traditional moon calendar things. So there's those sorts of examples that she's definitely creative. And the artwork that gets produced, so they produced, her and one of her friends created a big mural in Hamilton around Matariki. There's lots of artwork around our star work too that's been done through Matariki and all of that sorts of things. But also one of my colleagues, Tim, they've got an exhibition at the moment, but it's around rockets and, yeah, is it missiles, and at the Douse. Yeah, and futuristic kind of housing. I don't know, I'm really bad at explaining it. But that diversity of, like, the art and science and space, and I've seen space data. Yeah, have you seen it? The space data that is layered into artwork. There's one here at Vic. We just noticed it the other day. It's radio signals, and it's an artwork drawn by, it must be a robotic arm or something, but it's radio signals. So yeah, so much you can do. It's just kind of out of it. But definitely it's interesting who goes to Mars. Who would you include? It's not just engineers and scientists and physicists.
I also think we can't overstate the role for people like journalists and communicators for the space industry, and just making everything relatable to the general public, and understanding, for example, you know, what the latest Mars rover is going to do when it arrives on Mars, and why, you know, people are traveling to the International Space Station on private vehicles, and just making this all relatable and understandable for the general public, instead of just, you know, the people who are actually involved in it and know the science. I think that's really important in bringing people together, which is what this topic is all about.
Thinking through the philosophy aspect that you mentioned, Daniel, as well. I mean, I completely agree with you, and it's such an important aspect. In a lot of ways, it's why we do all this stuff, right? Like, why do we even have a space station? Why is the US public and the international, you know, ISS contributors, why are their taxpayers paying for this stuff? You know, there are some good reasons, and you know, they deserve to be thought deeply about and well communicated. So, and hopefully that produces a bit of a feedback loop where people are interested, they're happy for their taxpayer dollars to be going towards some of these programs, and including, you know, science and mātauranga and all of those, any aspect where we're sort of all working together to find answers. So yeah, totally agree. Engineers just do the bit at the end to try and find the answers, but it's all of us who wants to know, hopefully.
Thank you all. We have a next question. Tech companies often incentivize employees to refer their friends and within their network. Pauline, that seems to be in tension with the anti-diversity effect that you mentioned regarding, they've used the term shoulder tapping, which I think you used the term headhunting. Any thoughts for everyone, also Pauline, on how to find the right balance? I guess more time.
I'm giving Pauline a chance in case she wants to jump in there. I'm thinking, like, when I think about what we're doing with our team, yes, people are reaching out and contacting people they know. We're also going to advertise it and try and be careful. And I think there's some really valid points being raised about, you know, actually about how you write the advert and all that sort of thing, so that you still are attracting a wider group of people to apply. But I think there's a big responsibility if you are going to go down a shoulder tapping / headhunting route, a responsibility on the organisation to be really intentional about that, to actually actively look beyond the, your really known field, being intentional about where you advertise. There's lots of different groups that exist. Are we going out and actually letting them know, look, there's this job, would you like to, any of your people like to apply for that? So I think actually the responsibility, that is a balance, I agree, it's totally a balance, but I think there's a big responsibility that comes back on the organisations involved.
Yeah, thanks. I think my mind just needed to warm up. But following up from the job description is so important. You're right. Like, them having we are committed to diversity, or maybe we are really committed to diversity. I don't know how you would actually do it in a job advertisement. As for the being actively recruiting, one thing too is really important is to ensure that there's a long-term commitment for being recruiting properly. So I've had that phone call, and then with the follow-up phone call, and then nothing. So that's not cool, But if you're going to recruit and you're going to commit to ringing someone, then it needs to be that full follow through, because that person might not have enough confidence to email you back and say, hey, just wondering what's happening with that role, or the like. So yeah, job descriptions and that commitment to an honourable recruitment process.
So very important. Actually, that pivots incredibly well to our next question. An attendee who wishes to remain anonymous has written in about a family member who is faces some challenges and doesn't quite have the confidence, perhaps, that you spoke of, Pauline, and has some very specific abilities with regards to being within the transportation industry, but really might be interested in fitting in within the space industry. He's struggling with social awareness. Sorry, I'm paraphrasing. It's hard to read and paraphrase and speak simultaneously. He does live in the Wellington area and is looking to build connections and gain confidence. Does anyone have any suggestions on how to pivot to the space industry?
Daniel, what's in your group?
So yeah, that's a good point. So we're called the New Zealand Student Space Association, but really we're open to everyone who's interested in space and wants to learn more, no matter whether you're studying at university or high school or wherever. So I think we're a good starting point for people who don't have the experience which space industry professionals might be looking for, but we're a good place if you just want to understand more about what is happening in the industry, start meeting some people who are already involved who can put you on the right track. I think places like us and Space Base are really good to get in touch with. I'm sure we can spread our contact details somehow after this. But I think, starting off with somewhere where it's a more social, relaxed environment where you can just start meeting people and get talking to people, start making those connections is a great way to start getting into it if you're a bit unsure or don't have the experience which you think you might need.
Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
Sorry. No, I was going to ask Daniel, and sometimes you have talking events, or symposiums I've seen advertised before as well, eh? Yeah,
that's right. We try and get speakers along from the industry, but we also hold just social events regarding, exciting launches or watching space movies. So there's a big social element to it as well, which I think helps people get more comfortable if they're a bit unconfident.
I wonder, Daniel, the other aspects in this particular, without knowing the details, but maybe a buddy, it can be quite difficult for some people to take that leap and engage with the group that they don't know. So I don't know whether this person, whether they could contact you and maybe meet one-on-one or do something just to make them a bit more comfortable before they get involved with the wider group. I think all of us have, at least I certainly have a bit of anxiety about that stuff, and tend to come across as quite confident. So I can't imagine what it's like for someone who's on the spectrum, even slightly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a good point. I guess it's not all about being in big groups of people, and because for some people that can be overwhelming if you're a bit more introverted. So I think more of a one-on-one, maybe mentorship or buddying system is something that we should really look at. Yeah, that's a good point.
Are there any, sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask a question, but I'm going to because I'm interested. Are there any online communities that these guys could join? You know, like Avana, she said exactly what I was thinking, that if you're already feeling kind of awkward about getting into people, going to a group is going to be hard. And when you think about how young people interact with each other now, it's all through gaming or through different apps. And, you know, like, is there anything out there that people could sort of take their first steps in a not even a person-to-person way?
I have a suggestion. Sorry. I was going to mention the space meetup. Wellington has a Facebook page, very specifically. We get some very interesting sets of discussions. Sorry, over to you.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. There are lots of good Facebook groups out there who share, you know, cool articles and other events relating to space. Our local astronomy clubs are a good one as well. But in terms of, that's a good point, Emma, about kind of virtual environments. And I've actually been approached recently from someone from the Space Generation Advisory Council, which is a very fancy sounding organization, but they're looking to make more connections here in New Zealand. They're already established overseas, but they've set up a channel on Slack, which don't know if you're aware of, the viewers might be, but it's a platform online for messaging in groups on different topics. And that's currently its beginning stages, but we'd like to develop that into an avenue where people can interact with people across the country virtually without having to be there in person. So absolutely, that's a great idea for some people's preferred method of getting involved.
I guess in terms of employment, I think the question may have referred to employment as well as just involvement. And obviously, there's some aspects of that person's skill set that are diverse and that you know, can provide a competitive edge. And I guess perhaps making that clear, if you know, have a look at applying for a job and make it clear, okay, yeah, I have these difficulties, but at the same time, I have these real strengths, and that could be a good way to get a foot in the door. Certainly, if I received that CV, I'd want to know more, at least, and have a chat and have a discussion. So, you know, try and take that leap and give it a go. You never know where you can end up.
I guess I just wanted to mention something about that I've talked with my wider group of friends about is the recognitions of our different personality types and our different abilities, you know, like those who can hyper focus or those that, I don't want to say obsessive, but yeah, those people that have those different, you know, even people who might be on the spectrum and stuff like that, who have certain particular abilities that suit different types of work. That's all I'm going to say on that, but it's fascinating. I do think about it a lot. But yeah, and being able to uniquely be able to encourage people with different types of personality and diverse ways of being as well, to encourage them, because they're untapped potential, you know, and how we can encourage that potential to be realised. Yeah, I have no idea how that would happen, but it'll be super cool.
Absolutely. Actually, I have a specific question for Dr. Harris. It's likely going to be our last question due to time. Are there many other Maori and Pacifica women they've said this field, I think they mean the space and astronomy field?
There's one other Maori who has a PhD in astronomy, Yeah, Tui, yeah. She's in Australia. And me and and Tiri, Tiri Sullivan, one of our friends. He's got his master's, and then it's kind of looking a bit thin. I have seen some brilliant ones coming through though. Not many, but I've seen some brilliant ones, so keeping an eye on them. But there is that Maori engineer who doesn't he work for NASA? I haven't actually met him yet. But I've seen him with works with some of the education things through Massey. Yeah. That's at that higher level. In undergraduate, you see people, but then there's this disjoint between undergrad to postgrad to the industries. Yeah. Is that yeah.
Excellent. Oh, and Daniel has shared a space discussion Slack channel. Thank you so much. If that's okay with you, Daniel, I might share that to the Facebook group and to our meetup as well, if that's acceptable.
Absolutely, please do. Yeah, that's the online discussion board I mentioned before, and yeah, good way to start meeting other people.
I see that the clock is ticking close to our end time, and I'd like to say, of course, a special thank you to our panelists who have been so very fantastic. Do any of you have any last thoughts or words? Not mandatory, it's okay. Okay. I want to thank Daniel Wrench. I want to thank Pauline Harris, Dr. Pauline Harris, apologies, Dr. Avinash Rowe, and Emma Scarlett. And I'd especially also like to thank some of our sponsors for this evening: Spacebase, TechWeek, the Space Meetup in Wellington, and the New Zealand Students Space Association. This has been a fantastic session. I'd like to thank everyone who attended. I'd especially like to thank our panelists who gave up their Thursday evening to spend time with us and build to a fascinating discussion. Many thanks. Let's see, can I find my little reaction thingy? No, I can't find my reaction thingy. I was looking to do a little clap. Apologies. Many thanks, and I owe all of you guys exceptionally well, really big. I owe you guys a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Julie,
you for organising
moderating.
it.
Yeah, really enjoyed it.
Great to meet all of you. Hopefully we get to meet in person sometime soon.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Well, thanks, Julia.
Cool.